Howdy, y'all.
Welcome back to the Grace Prep Podcast. My name is Joshua Young.
I'm Lily Malott.
And my name is Jenni Lord. I am a longtime New Braunfels resident. I've lived here for 19 years. I have 4 teenagers, 19, 18, 17, and 14. You may know one of them who is a senior at Grace Prep, Hattie Lord. I am her mom, and I love her. I'm so glad and thankful to be with you all today. I lead an organization called Chosen. It's a nonprofit that's been serving in our community for the past 15 years.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for coming on today. I'm super excited for our conversation. I think it's going to be great. It's going to be great.
Me too.
Well, special thanks to Two Rivers for sponsoring our podcast. This is our second podcast inside of Two Rivers. So, Two Rivers, we love you. Thank you for sponsoring us and helping us do this. If you're a student, you're an adult, you're anybody, and you love coffee, definitely check out Two Rivers. They have the best coffee, they have the best atmosphere, and they have the best employees. So come over here, grab yourself a cup of coffee, work on some homework, or work on some work if you're an adult. And yeah, that's about it. Well, Mrs. Lord, you're the CEO, founder of The Chosen, or is it just Chosen?
Just Chosen.
Just Chosen.
I like
okay.
to share that we're not The Chosen, but we're happy to share the name. We had it first.
Awesome. So tell us a little bit about what Chosen does.
Okay, well, can I tell you a little bit of how we started
Yes.
and then
Let's start
and
there.
how it's changed? So I started the organization 15 years ago to help families who wanted to adopt children and needed help financially to do that. And we did that for about 5 years. We raised money to help families who were adopting. Yours was one of them. And we served almost 400 families with adoption funds over that time. And about 5 years into it, we had what I call a missional evolution. We changed direction, and that came from learning about some deeper needs than just the financial resources. We had learned that there was a very disturbing trend of some people were dissolving adoptions and putting kids back into the system, rehoming them. People were also displacing children from foster care. After they had said yes, they were putting kids back into foster care. And that was just heartbreaking to me for a child to experience another separation and loss in their life. And we decided we really had a stewardship responsibility. We had been advocating for the needs of vulnerable children, not just in our own community, but all over the world, and calling people into this space to respond to it as Christians, as believers, as followers of Jesus. And for a child to feel that sense of pain again from another family loss was just tragic to me. And I can come back to my personal story, how I'm tied into it at some point today, but we decided that we really wanted to do something to help families stay in the game. We wanted to help them with the resources that they needed to help their children heal from the experiences that they had in their past that were painful, and for families to keep going. So we've been doing that now for almost 10 years.
10 years, wow.
Yeah.
Wow, very cool. I love that. So I have on here, we'll probably get more into that, but something that really piqued my interest is you're the CEO of Chosen and a thought leader. What does that mean to you?
Great question. So being a thought leader means that you're influencing change, right? If you're seen as a thought leader, then you're doing something that's going against the grain, that's challenging the status quo.
Okay.
And it is extremely important to me that we have systemic transformation. And what that means is that we have a child welfare system that is very flawed, and that system is designed to protect children who've been harmed. They've been, they're either at risk for being removed from their family, or they've already been removed from their family. And the whole system is designed around physical safety. And as a parent, I know, and you know as kids with parents, that what's needed in your life is more than just physical safety. That's not enough. And what I've seen over the last 30 years since I've been connected to this space, from a personal standpoint, 15 years professionally, what I have seen is that the same system problems that I saw 30 years ago persist today. And as a believer, as a follower of Christ, it's unacceptable. So there's got to be systemic change, and we're doing something different that's really working. And I can talk a little bit about that, but it's really moving from a welfare mentality to a well-being and looking at the whole family system, not just the child's physical safety. and hoping to produce change in that and believing that we will in my lifetime.
Yeah.
Very cool.
That's great. So
Very
you said
cool.
you've been connected with it for 30 years?
Yes.
So how did you first kind of get introduced to that?
Yes. So I have a brother who was adopted out of foster care. He came into our home when I was a teenager, like y'all, and he was just a toddler. He was 19 months old at the time. And so I was almost entering adulthood, and seeing that journey with him, his adoption took almost 5 years to complete.
Whoa.
So we actually, the same month that I graduated from college was when we celebrated the finalization of his adoption in court. So it was a beautiful thing, but it was also a heartbreaking thing. For 5 years, I saw the inside of the child welfare system. I saw how that system that's designed to protect children can actually bring them harm sometimes, how kids fall through the cracks. And God birthed something inside of me that I wanted to do something about what I had witnessed. And so that's the personal connection.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right on. So you talked about, quote, the current child welfare system isn't effective. Why is it not affected? I know you just touched on some children falling through the cracks, but could you elaborate more on that?
Yeah, so my family, when Hattie was probably in 4th grade, maybe 5th grade, we were a licensed foster family, and we brought 2 kids into our home through foster care who needed a place to be safe and to be loved and to be separated from their family that had significantly harmed them. And I work in this space, and yet when I was going through the foster care licensing process, the priorities were things like covering your outlets, making sure that there was no medication that was within reach of a child, making sure that if there was any guns or artillery, that was locked up. And so everything that would keep a child physically safe, that was the priority. And yet no one's talking to you about the emotional wounds. How do you help kids navigate that? How do you help them feel safe? It's not enough to just be physically safe. They actually have to have psychological safety, which we all need to be free and to be our authentic self. You need psychological safety to build relationships, and no one teaches you that. And so when you've got kids who are in your home who've been traumatized, and the way that comes out is through really big behaviors that are challenging, how do you navigate that? And so that's what I mean by affecting that change. We have a very low threshold for what's required to actually care for kids well.
Really? Okay.
And help them overcome that pain from their first family.
So is that low threshold in order to adopt, why is that? Is that more like we just need children out of these environments and put them in a safe environment where they can't access medicine, they can't access guns or knives or like whatever that is? Why do people tend to focus on the environment and not mental health and psychological health?
Yeah, it's a good question. It's layered and it's complex. So as you know, not in all cases of adoption, but certainly with kids who are in the foster care system, they have access to mental health services. But what that could look like is they have to see a therapist, but what's tracked is the number of times they see a therapist, not what is the outcome. Are they actually progressing? Are they doing better? Or are we just medicating challenges, right? And so as an example, I've been working in this space for 15 years. We serve hundreds of families every single year, not just in our community, but across the US. And I had a state official tell me that she didn't really want to know the results of this group of teenagers that we were working with who had been in foster care for a long period of time. She didn't want to know about how their anxiety had decreased, how their anger and outbursts had decreased. What she wanted to know was the number of encounters. How many times have you seen these youth? So that's what we're measuring as a state. How many times has that child been seen by a practitioner, a mental health counselor? Not, are they getting better? Are they actually healing from what they've experienced? So that low threshold to me is unacceptable.
Yeah.
So they're just kind of like checking it off, the list.
Right.
So how is Chosen helping with that? How do y'all practically aid these kids that are, going through all this mental trauma and help them their well-being versus just their safety?
Well, first of all, we're addressing the whole needs of the whole family.
Yeah.
God designed the family. He designed children to be in families, right? So you can't look at the needs of a child apart from the needs of the family, because that child is in, whether it's a foster family, they're living with a relative, or they're in an adoptive family. You have to first address the needs of the whole family. The second thing that we believe is true, and this is backed up by science and certainly by scripture, is connection is key. And what I mean by that is, you may know this, but when you've had traumatic experiences, it actually rewires your brain. Mm-hmm. So it rewires the way that you think, the way that you relate to the world, and what's possible is God is so amazing that our brains can actually be rewired. Mm-hmm. That rewiring for healthy patterns comes from healthy connection. So what we like to say is children who have been harmed in relationship, first family, bad circumstances in the past, they can only heal in the context of relationship. So the first thing that we teach parents and caregivers is connection is key. Building that healthy connection is what calms behaviors down. It's what changes the wiring in their brains and forms healthy attachment. To have a strong relationship, there has to be first a connection and then there has to be an attachment, right? But unfortunately, sometimes these kids bring a lot of baggage into the home, and the last thing you want to do if they're acting crazy, it's dividing the family from actually building that healthy connection and attachment. And so, number one, connection is key. Number two, parents and caregivers are the linchpin to their children healing. So think about that. We know that children don't heal in a therapist office 1 hour a week or twice a month. They're with their family the majority of their waking hours, right? And so their parents and caregivers need to be equipped and empowered with the tools and strategies that are trauma responsive, that are going to lean into building healthy connection. And that can, do you want like an example of that?
Sure, yeah. So
I've learned so much from my team about parenting. It's actually completely changed how I parent. Some of us the pattern typically is that you parent the way that you were parented, and when we know better, we do better, right? And I probably, when Hattie was young, I prioritized correction more than connection. You're just trying to shape a child into how they're responding, and once I learned that prioritizing connection actually changed the dynamics of the relationships with all of my children in my home over correction and control. Yeah. If controlling behavior is what you're looking for, your tactics are probably not going to be very solid in building a connection, right? And so when my kids were young, we did some of the traditional discipline that probably some of you were disciplined by. And when I learned that building the connection first over maybe sending a child away to timeout was more effective in actually correcting their behavior, that really was a profound revelation for me in my own parenting. So for kids who've been abused or neglected, or they've experienced abandonment, where the message that they have gotten in their lives is, I'm alone, I'm in a survival state, I don't know if I'm gonna eat, I don't know who's gonna take care of my little brother, so I'm 5 years old and I'm taking care of my little brother. When you're living in that state of you're in charge, when you come into a new home, that doesn't just go away because you're in a new physically safe place. You've got to build that psychological safety, right? So if I discipline a 5-year-old that has that background and they're in trouble because they're acting crazy because of what's happened to them, and I send them away, what message am I giving them?
Right.
You're not wanted.
Yeah.
I'm not with you. And that type of discipline for a child who's experienced trauma in their past is completely ineffective. So that's just a very small example of a way that we're doing things, teaching families to do things differently that are building a different pattern of connection.
Yeah. Very cool. Very cool. So if I'm correct me if I'm wrong, but you started this in a little church office, is that right? I think that's what Hattie told me.
I think I started it in my garage first.
In your garage?
Wow.
Awesome. No, I love that. I love that. So how did you grow your company, your nonprofit, right? Nonprofit into international, not international, U.S. like wide? How did you do that?
Well, I like to say that one faithful, obedient yes to God, you never know what's on the other side of that. So the way that I started is very different from what we're doing today. You know, I shared earlier that we started out funding adoptions. I really wasn't trying to start a nonprofit. I just had an idea that I felt like God gave me, that I said yes to. And then I started learning what was going to be required to put those things in place to make it happen. The idea was to start a race that would benefit adoptive families. I was a runner. I wanted to run for something that I believed in. You've already heard adoption was very important to me. And the church had really woken up into the 2000s to the international needs and the needs in our own backyard for kids. It was a big topic in our community. How could we help families who want to say yes but aren't sure where to start or needed financial assistance? So I just wanted to raise money. So the first year we raised money. We gave it all away. That's not a great business plan, anyone? But I wasn't trying to start a business. I just wanted to help people.
Right.
And God brought people alongside me to help me. In the beginning, everybody was a volunteer. I was raising the idea, I didn't even have my fourth child yet. And so I was raising these little people and being a mom full time and doing this on the side, right? And so I think they're just being faithful with a little bit as over time, God began to grow that. And about 3 or 4 years into it, I just said, this is so much bigger than this volunteer team. Like, it needed dedicated resources, it needed staff, it needed people that were gonna help take it to the next level. And probably around year 2 or 3 was when I moved from home to the church office, tiny little church office. It was a closet actually that had been converted. And so thankful for that space. I used it when my kids were in Mother's Day out. They weren't even in school yet. But it was the time that I had, this little bit of time that I had to work on it while I was raising young children. And then about 5 years into it, when we made this missional evolution, that was the start of a new season for us to do what we were gonna do in equipping and empowering families with this trauma responsive care. We actually started it out in a volunteer way. We were going to bring in mentors, like maybe your mom and dad, who could help other families who had gone through similar struggles. And very quickly we learned that these families needed way more than a volunteer. They were dealing with some really challenging things that required clinical expertise. Well, we didn't have clinicians on staff. So we, again, God brought the people and surrounded me with the knowledge and wise counsel to understand the resources that were needed, and He has been faithful to provide for those resources as we built our team to meet the needs of children and families so that families can keep going. Yeah, so I know a lot of people like to just talk about the end result, like where you are now, and they don't really like to touch on like the journey and the hardships, the successes and the failures. What was some of the hard parts of starting like your nonprofit? I mean, now, like, you're US wide, like you're a huge nonprofit. What was some of the difficulties starting out? Well, one of the most difficult things in the beginning, I remember there was about 6 volunteers that helped to execute the first race, and we would meet on, I think, a monthly basis. And somebody that had engineering experience, somebody that had financial experience, and I was painting this vision for what I could see, how it needed to be, what I wanted it to look like. And they were saying, how are we going to pay for this? I'm like, I don't know, but God is faithful, and He's going to bring the resources that we need to bring this to pass. And I'll tell you what, the first race cost $30,000, and literally we had every single penny covered by sponsors from the community, like Two Rivers, who gave coffee on race morning, who provided for what we needed to have the race timed so that it felt like a professional race, because that's what runners care about, right? God, He covered all of those costs using people, right, who were coming alongside me with the vision that I had. So one of the biggest challenges is just starting something from nothing. How? Well, Lord, show us how, right? It's just, and I wouldn't again, not the best business plan, because you need a plan. Like, obviously scripture says count the cost.
Right.
And I just was trying to be faithful to this vision that I felt like he had given me. Yeah.
Very cool.
That was probably one of the first biggest challenges. And I'll tell you what, the numbers are bigger. Like today, our annual budget is $3.7 million. So the challenges are similar, they just get bigger.
Yeah, right, right, exactly.
You know, another thing is we're in the people business. We hire staff, we train staff, and people are messy, right? People are hard, and I have this vision for what I want to accomplish with children and families, but I'm not doing that alone. I'm doing that through the help of a team, and navigating people challenges. To me, it's the biggest challenge in running an organization.
Okay, right on.
Just to be honest.
Yeah.
You talked a little bit earlier about like God's idea for the family system and like the structure of it. How has that kind of affected how y'all move forward and run Chosen?
Ask it one more time.
So you talked earlier about how, you know, God has a plan for the family structure and system. So how has that like affected your mission as Chosen, being rooted in, you know, the gospel and the Bible instead of just trying to help these kids?
Yeah, I would say this. Because God's design is family, and He loves these kids. He wants them to heal. He wants them to be in a place of restoration, right? And what was important to us is that children don't move unnecessarily. So sometimes a judge says a child has to go. This was the case when we were foster parents. We had 2 kids in our home, and they had some relatives, a great aunt who was willing to take them. And so those kids eventually went to live with a relative. That was not our decision, that was the judge's decision. We would have kept them had it been a different scenario. When it's up to the parents and caregivers, we never want a child to move unnecessarily. So I would say this, our priority is permanency. You live in a permanent family. Like you're the family that you have been, you're going to continue to be connected to them even when you're not living at home anymore, right? And children, they need that in their lives. They need that stability. So our aim is helping kids to heal, but also keeping them in the same place. And we've had a 99% success rate in keeping families together over these past 10 years. So what we're doing works, and we know that, and it's because it's a discipleship model. We're empowering people who are hurting, who they're in a ditch, and they're saying, we're struggling, this is really hard, we don't know if we can keep going, this is not what we thought it was going to look like. And we're empowering them with tools and resources that are gospel-centric, that are also backed by science to show what's effective in helping kids to heal. We're empowering them with those tools to get on a path of healing. And they don't need us forever. That's the empowerment part, is we're teaching them how to build the healthy connection in very practical ways, just like Jesus does with us. He teaches us little by little how to walk out the gospel. That's what we're teaching families. Yeah.
So you talked about, I want to circle back to seeing a vision. How do you cast a vision for a team and you encourage them to fulfill that vision that you have? What does that role look like as a leader?
Well, it's my most important role. So what does scripture say? It says, without vision, the people perish. Yeah. So put that in a business context. People get burned out, they quit, it gets too hard because they're losing sight of what's the actual vision that we have here. I like to say it's a chief reminding officer role. It's like, I'm the chief reminder, like, here's the vision, this is what we're headed to. And it takes a lot of intentionality to reinforce that vision. So because we have a team that's spread out across the country, we do a lot of Zoom videos and meetings, and every chance I get when I'm with the team, I'm reminding them of what we call the moonshot vision. I can tell y'all a little bit about that. I'm reminding them of that so that they never lose sight of it. And I'm also, not just me, but I'm certainly teaching other leaders within our organization and helping them, encouraging them to make sure that we're connecting people to the vision. So let's just say, if you're working directly with with the children and families who are hurt, it's in front of you every day, this vision. Well, if you're working in accounting, are you still remembering the why that's behind it?
Yeah.
Like it's important to know our why. Why am I connected to this mission? And casting that vision is extremely important. You have to do it with words, you have to do it with pictures, and it takes intentional reinforcement.
Right.
Yeah.
Awesome. That's so cool. It's there's so many leaders in our world today, and there's so few great leaders who can cast that vision and empower employees and the people that they ultimately affect to tap into that vision and follow that.
So the reason I call it the moonshot vision, when JFK was in 1962, he said, we're going to put a man on the moon by the end of the decade. They didn't have a plan.
Yeah.
But he could see we can go to the moon, right? It was a moonshot vision that he cast in a crowd. It was caught on video, and it actually happened in 1969 by the end of the decade. Because, and I think it's the Habakkuk that says, write the vision down so that when people pass it by, they can see the vision. Right? When you write it down, when you speak it out, there's power in that, right? God gave us, because we're created in the image of a creator. When he created, he spoke it out, and it came to pass, right? We have that same power. So when we can see a vision of what's possible and we speak that out, there's power in that. The reason I call ours a moonshot vision is because we want to see systemic transformation in our lifetime. We want to see the child welfare system as a child and family well-being system that prioritizes trauma-responsive care and healthy relational connection. And I believe we can do it in our lifetime.
Yeah, very cool, very cool. So you talked about empowering and encouraging families and ultimately the children of those families with specific tools. And earlier you mentioned like mental health care, and what was the other one? Oh, discipline, right? Correct discipline. So are there like any other tools? I mean, you reference tools a lot, and that piques my interest.
Yeah, I was shared with somebody yesterday. We've been calling it a tool belt. Like our teams talks about, they have this tool belt, and it's like, okay, I'm going to take out this tool that's appropriate for this child who's raising littles. Okay, I'm going to take out different tools when I'm talking with a family who's raising teenagers, different needs, right? I think I'm going to start calling it the arsenal.
The arsenal.
This is better, right? It's like the arsenal of different tools. And so our team is trained in a number of modalities, which is just different types of curriculum that are appropriate for different needs. And some of those tools, they might deal with what's called blocked care, where a parent loses empathy for their child and compassion for their story, and they don't have the ability to give them the care that they need. That might be necessary to use with a family. We might teach another family, let's say that they're raising grandchildren and they're in their 60s or 70s. We see that a lot. That's really hard. And sometimes those grandparents, they have to grieve what they thought their life was going to look like, because they didn't plan for this. And even helping them to understand, like, what you're feeling is a natural part of loss. Like, you lost this vision that you had for what your future was going to look like, and you're not just grandma anymore, you're also mom in her eyes. Like, that's a different role. And helping family caregivers understand how that role shifts what they thought their identity looked like at that age is really important. So that's another example. Those grandparents are often isolated, where maybe they don't have friends in their life who are also raising grandkids. Like, who do they relate to? So making sure that they have a support system in place that is going to be there when Chosen's not walking alongside them anymore, right? So there's just some different tools like that that are necessary depending on the family that's in front of us. Yeah.
So Hattie earlier mentioned that you're a little stubborn.
That
you're stubborn, and that you have
Hattie
like a pretty
said I was stubborn?
Well, right before we started, she was talking about your personality and how you're pretty stubborn, but how that's actually like helped you to scale this. So like, how has your perseverance and just kind of like can-do sort of attitude affected how you've been able to start all of this?
I totally feel like she like called me out. No, I think it's a character trait that was probably quite a nuisance when I was young, that God has used for great purposes. And that's what he does, right? He takes that kind of raw material that's unformed, it's unsanctified in us, and he channels that to use it for his glory and his purposes, right? When I was in 3rd grade, my favorite book was Little Miss Bossy. So, just take yourself back to 3rd grade.
Yeah,
3rd grade.
exactly.
You knew
Yep.
that kid in your class, right? Liked to tell people what to do. But there's probably some leadership traits that were in me young, right, that were cultivated and grew over time. I was definitely very stubborn as a adolescent and teenager. And part of that was just I have a strong sense of justice. So I'm very oriented towards justice. Like, I don't like to be told no, especially when I think it's the right way to go, right? It's not always the easiest thing to parent. But I think it kind of goes back to vision. When you can see what's possible and you know that the way that the system is designed that is hurting kids or not giving their families the resources that they need, like, that's not acceptable to me. And so the reality is, when you do anything big or anything for God, any obedient yes, like, there's going to be resistance. There's going to be obstacles. There's going to be really hard things that you have to overcome. And I feel like he's just given me some grit in that area. I've overcome some things in my own life, in my own parenting journey, and I've seen him be faithful. And I'll tell you too, I used to be a marathoner, like that. I told you I had a passion for running, and there was something that translated spiritually when you're out there putting one foot in front of another to complete 10 miles or 18 miles or 13 miles, whatever it might be, to keep going when you want to quit. Like, God used a lot of those days of running to show me, like, I can do hard things and I can keep going, and so can you.
Very cool. So that stubbornness, do you have a hard time with, like, accepting correction? Like, as a leader, I think it's valuable to learn your mistakes and then improve off of that. But does your stubbornness get in the way of that sometimes?
First of all, I just commend you with the question. It's an astute, wise question. And certainly when I was younger, I struggled with correction. Now I have learned to see, like, God's word said he loves the son he loves, he corrects. So seeing correction as love is a good thing, right? And he uses people to do that. And sometimes, because I have a strong personality, because I am a leader, like, my voice is louder. Unintentional or not, it's louder. And so knowing how that people receive that is extremely important, and being able to take correction, it's the only way that you're going to grow. And I'll tell you, to be honest, you may have experienced this in your life, and if you haven't yet, you will. You get to certain points in your journey of leadership or whatever you're doing where people don't give you feedback or don't give you correction, and you're saying, hey Lily, can I get some feedback on how'd it go today? Is there anything you want me to do differently? You have to be willing to seek out that correction and feedback, and I have to ask for it. So I think when I was younger, yes, it was harder for me because I was super stubborn. Now I crave it. Like, I want to be the best version of myself. I want to accomplish what God has for me on the earth. And you're not going to do that if you're not listening to people. Right? Yeah.
Keeping an open mind is so valuable. So
100%.
Yeah. I wanted to circle back to what you said about helping parents, like, with their giving them specific tools. Y'all are so highly intentional and highly caring. Like, in this world today, it feels like nobody is no longer intentional. Like, they're going quickly, they're trying to get their stuff done, and y'all are slowing down, and y'all are deeply caring and deeply loving for these families. How do you inspire people in your company, in your nonprofit, in order to be that way? Or do they just come naturally with that personality?
I think our team has done a really good job of I have a program leader who's leading that staff, And as the team has grown, I think there's a culture, there's an expectation of seeing progress within families. Like God is using us, but what is within a person, like we're just helping to draw that strength to the surface that they can keep going, right? And so one of the things that we do with families, we do give them these tools. We actually give them what's called action plans every week. And this is very specific, intentional ways that they're gonna work to build connection in their home this week. Maybe dealing with a certain behavior. Let's say that every night at bath time, this 7-year-old boy is having a complete meltdown. Well, what bath time looks like for mom and dad might have to change. There's some fear or something that's getting in the way of that has been causing chaos in this home every single day for weeks on end. Everyone's exhausted. These hour-long meltdowns are depleting everyone and not worth it. So we might have to get a scrub toy at the kitchen sink, and they get to do it by themselves, even with some of their clothes on, so that they can just feel comfortable and eliminate. So as we give them a practical tool, the next week their care manager is going to say, okay, Lily, how did it go with little Johnny when you tried this different tactic? And they're going to be held accountable for what that change was supposed to look like in their home. That's a huge piece of it, because when they know that they're going to be accountable for it, they're going to actually do it. And there's something within them that wants to have a good report, right? But the other thing that our team does is says, let's say it didn't go well. Let's say he hated that too. Okay, well, Lily, tell me what went well last week with Johnny. And that's one of the first questions our team does every week is, what went well? Because what is happening in these families when there's a lot of chaos is it feels like nothing's going well. And so we're teaching them to see these small little victories and the small incremental changes that they're making in their home. And you have to slow down to see that. Totally. I have to slow down to see that kind of progress in my own life. And so I think that's just kind of baked into the way that we work with families, where they are actually, they're serving as a force function to help people slow down so that they're recognizing those little victories.
So do y'all, like, of course y'all are working with these families. Is there a way that y'all encourage people outside of the chosen or outside of families that have adopted or a part of foster care to like help others with that? Like, do y'all have any kind of like fundraisers or organizations or information for people who are just maybe surrounded by people who are in the foster system or adoption or all those kinds of things?
We do. So we fundraise about 60% of our income, and some of that is through some small events. Like we had a small event in Austin last night where we're educating the people that are in the room about the challenges that exist within our system of care, but also some of the opportunities and how we're making an impact with these families, so people can certainly give that way. We also have a training program that I haven't talked about, and one of the things that we found was, you know, we can only grow and scale our organization, our reach so fast, and unfortunately the needs far exceed what we're able to do. And because we've been so successful in helping families stay together, we feel like there's a stewardship responsibility to help teach and train others with what we've learned is so effective. And so we do some training that is not just for professionals, but is also for families and for caregivers or people who are connected to families who are hurting, so that they can learn some of these tools and strategies as well. So that's another way that we're sharing just beyond, you know, some education and fundraising.
Yeah, that's so cool. So what are like some of the practical ways you tell someone they can help like support someone they know who is like, you know, fostering or adopting or going through that process?
Yeah, and do you mean like other family members or?
Other family members, close friends, like those kind of situations.
Yeah, I think everybody needs compassionate ear, and sometimes these families feel like really lonely and isolated, and so just an awareness of like, how are you really doing? Like, how is it going? And asking those intentional questions, leaning in. If a family in your circle has a new placement where they've gotten kids overnight unexpectedly, that's what happened to us. We actually had like about 2 hours of notice when we got our foster care placement, and the kids were so excited. They've never cleaned the house so fast. I mean, they were like, because we wanted it to be a family decision. So before we said yes, we sat down with our kids, even though they were little at the time. Emerson, my oldest, was 11, and Judah was 6. So we sat down and said, hey, we got this call, it's an emergency, what do y'all think? And they were like, yes, Mom, let's do it, So they jumped up, cleaned the house, whatever. Well, when that happens to a family, you can imagine it's like they were bringing an infant. I didn't have any diapers. I didn't have any formula. I didn't even have a crib. And so, there were some practical needs very quickly that other people could bring us, baby clothes, like things that we were going to need. Eventually I'm going to go to Target, but not that day, and not probably the next day, because those kids need a little bit of incubation, like they need it to feel safe in the nest, right? And we had a 5-year-old that needed a toddler, she needed a small bed, and there were just some very practical things. There were people who brought us food. There were people who helped with my other kids in transporting them to activities, because all of a sudden we had 6 kids, and we only had one vehicle that could fit our whole family. So there's just some practical ways that you can help a family who may be struggling or have new kids in their home in an unexpected way. Yeah.
Very cool.
That's so cool.
Very cool. So I feel like I'm not well educated in this area at all, but y'all help existing families with their adopted children, right? Y'all don't go find children and find the right home for them. Is that correct?
That's correct. So we help, let me say, we help 4 types of families. We help adoptive families. So sometimes a child has been in the home for a long time, like 6-8 years, and they hit road bumps where there's identity issues with the youth that really stem from that first loss in their life that maybe the family hasn't navigated yet. So we serve families that have adopted at any point in their journey. We serve foster families. We serve those relative caregivers, like what I was describing earlier. And we also serve families who can be safely reunified. So sometimes a family they've had their children removed for whatever reason. They've worked a plan to get them back together, and they're going to need those tools and resources to build, to repair the relationship, because the children were removed from them. And often the reason the kids were removed in the first place was from their own unhealed trauma, right? And so just navigating that with a family. So we really serve 4 types of families, but we're not helping to place children in families.
Awesome. When you find somebody with like a not good situation with their foster child, where do you encourage them to find value? I mean, ultimately we need to find value in Christ, but they may be like closed off to that idea. How do you like transition them? I mean, obviously loving them is important.
Sure.
Being kind to them is important. Giving them a safe place to live is important. But ultimately, you want to bring them to Christ, right? So, do you exclusively work with like Christian families then?
We don't.
You don't?
We don't.
Wow.
And that was a really intentional decision in the beginning. Okay. We want people who need help to get help. We don't want to turn them away. We're a faith-based organization. We don't hide that, but we also don't want that to be a barrier. So when a family first comes to us, we say, well, tell me how faith is impacting your parenting. And they might say, I don't want anything to do with that, right? So we kind of know that from the outset, and we let them know our faith orientation. But the reality is, Jesus wants us to be salt and light, and he wants us to be available for anybody, and we need to reach the hurting and the lost, right? Go seek and save the lost. And so just showing them the love of Christ. We have a lot of staff members who have lived experience where they have walked in these shoes, and they're able to offer to the family something because of their own experience, and the family's saying, how did you keep going? It's like, well, let me tell you, actually. And because of the relationship that we build with our clients, there is trust, and sometimes it does open the door to share the gospel. But you can share a biblical principle without a Bible address.
Right.
You can teach a parent, and I can teach y'all why being a peacemaker is different than being a peacekeeper. And you don't need a biblical address that's going to turn someone away to teach a biblical principle, right? So those are ways that we're sowing seeds for the gospel, and you trust that somebody's going to water those, or God that makes those grow, right?
Very cool.
Yeah.
Very cool.
So peacekeeper versus peacemaker. How would you like elaborate on that a little bit?
Yeah. So, I mean, do y'all know any like peacekeepers or like avoid conflict? Just like, okay, we all know a few of those, right? And I mean, the reality is the majority of people don't like conflict. I mean, unless you're a boxer or, you know, right? I mean, that's our human nature. We don't like conflict. Healthy conflict is important. And sometimes in parenting, what I'm going to say, you've probably seen this in your own house before, and I've certainly been guilty of this. Like, something happens, there's like a blow up, and it's like, you're just trying to get everyone calm as quickly as possible. You're not like actually dealing with the root and helping to bring peace between siblings. Let's just say between siblings, right? You're just like, I want the chaos to stop. Just stop talking, right? Just, you go over here, you like, well, is that actually working through the conflict? Is that actually peacemaking, or is that peacekeeping? I'm just gonna be honest, like, I'm probably naturally more inclined to the peacekeeping. It has been a choice to work towards making peace. And I think that's really important if you're gonna have healthy relationships. So hopefully that answered your question.
It's one of the tools in the arsenal.
Yeah.
The arsenal. Oh, I love that. I love that. Well, I think that's about it. Is that where we end it?
Well, Joshua, I don't know, because before we started, you asked me a question about your generation. You feel like the standards are low, right?
Okay.
So let's go there for just a minute. Yeah.
I'm down.
So why don't you pose your question versus me? I don't know.
Do you want me to answer the question?
I don't know. You had a question for me about this, I think.
Okay, so I don't think I know that our generation, like Gen Z, which is the generation I'm in, the expectation is so low. We're all known as teenagers who stare at a phone all the time. We're the generation who doesn't eat well, who typically doesn't exercise. We're known as like people who just look at screens all the time. And so our generation, the expectation is very, very low. And there's not that many people encouraging our generation to go out there and change the world, to eat well, to be kind, to exercise, to get off the phone and go like live in the real world. And so we have so much potential and nobody's looking at that. I hear it all the time. It's another kid looking at their phone, like, what are they doing with their life? And there's no encouragement. There's no call to action. And so I think something that your organization does beautifully is give people who are in contact with those children the tools in order to encourage them, in order for them to go out there and change the world. And I don't quite remember the question, but that's kind of what I was getting at, was like, that is so beautiful because there are so few people doing that. And so,
well, it's your question, your line of question is convicting for me because I probably have maybe had that mindset once or twice before, but I see within my own teenagers incredible potential. Incredible potential. And we have to practice who we want to become. So it kind of starts with like, what's the vision for your life? Like I asked my 14-year-old son this, the other day, like, how do you envision yourself 10 years from now? Right. So just helping to motivate youth like you all to think about what would I want my future to look like, and then you got to practice becoming that person, right? Do you want to be a hard worker? Do you want to have good fruit? That requires some hard work, right? It requires diligence. It requires discipline and perseverance through hard things. So it starts with a vision, as most things do, right? But can I read you a quote that I saw this yesterday, and I was like, man, I took a picture of it because I was like, yep, this is me. It was an art picture. I'll share it with y'all in case you want it. But it says, those who say it cannot be done should not interrupt those of us who are doing it.
That's really good. That's a sermon right there.
Right?
I love that.
And so there's always going to be naysayers. There's always going to be people that are lowering your standards for yourself, that are discouraging, that are not motivating you. But if you have a vision for where you want to go, like, you can be unstoppable in that. And that the reason that I took a picture of that is because there's definitely been naysayers in my path. Like, we're doing something that is bold and unique, and we have a huge vision, and I believe it's achievable. And so don't tell me it can't be done. Like, let's just get out of the way if that's going to be your right. And so I want you to feel unstoppable in whatever picture, dream that you have for your life. And if you don't have one yet, you should do some thinking about that.
Yeah, exactly. It's so vital to find those individuals, those friends who come alongside you and champion on that vision, but also at the same time be like, hey, that was not part of the vision. Like, we need to refocus. We need to reallocate what we're doing. And so criticism is good, but coming from the right people is the most important thing, not just the naysayers.
You can learn from all criticism.
Exactly.
The beneficial and the not beneficial, you can learn from all of it, right? And so, you know, beyond that, I think, I lost my train of thought. But
no, you're good.
Yeah.
You're good. It's all about having just like that open-mindedness. Because if you're closed-minded and you're stubborn, you're not going to get anywhere. I'm not trying to be rude. I'm not trying to be rude. It's just the word we used earlier. But if you have an open mind and you have a vision and you have the drive to do it, I mean, nothing can stop you.
So this is where I lost my train of thought. Okay. I remembered this because this is important, because some people are going to be listening to this or watching this and they're going to say, man, I have no idea what I want to do. Or, you know, they're going to hear it and say, well, I thought I wanted to do this, but now I don't know anymore. And so you may not know, but this is what I've learned. God doesn't waste anything.
Right.
The first several years out of college, the jobs that I had, they were stepping stones for what I would ultimately do. He was building my own character. He was putting new skills, new people, new ideas and resources that I wouldn't have had otherwise with those stepping stones. So even if you don't know what that is today, like, he's faithful when you're faithful, and he's faithful even when you're not, right? And so you can trust him that he's going to give you, it's going to unfold over time, and what it looks like today, what you think it's going to look like, it never looks like that. It's going to look differently, right?
Exactly.
Yeah. I think you're such a great example, because it's like the delicate balance of like having a vision, but then also, you know, you're looking for feedback and you're wanting, you know, people's comments and criticism. Like, even before we started, you were like, okay, so what's the win for this podcast? You know, like, how do we reach that? And I thought that was so cool, because I was like, that's a leader right there, and that's a thought leader. And like, okay, how do we reach our goal, and how do we get there? And I'm sure after this, you'll probably go, okay, what can we do, you know, next time? And, you know, and I think that's so important, that like that delicate balance between like, okay, having a vision, being a leader, moving forward, having a little bit of, you know, stubbornness and reaching the goal, but then also being open-minded and, you know, taking in people's opinions and criticism and feedback.
Thank you. Well, I think I've learned that with a little bit of wisdom that's produced gray hair over time.
Exactly. Well, be open to criticism. Love others. Anything else? Any other takeaways?
Get a vision.
Get a vision. Get a vision. A God vision. Not just your own vision, a God vision.
That's right. Yeah.
Well,
this is great.
Thank you so much for coming on.
Yeah.
That was a beautiful conversation.
You.
I loved it.
I
loved it.
I loved it.
Awesome.
Yeah. Thanks for having me.
We kind of do this also kind of goofy thing at the end of each podcast.
Okay.
We say deuces.
Say what?
Deuces.
Okay.
It's Hattie came up with it. So, yeah, on accident.
What does it mean?
Like goodbye.
No idea.
So I was wondering if you would say deuces with us.
Oh, sure.
At the end of it.
Okay.
On three. One.
Do I do the sign too?
Deuces. Yeah. On three. 1, 2, 3. Deuces. It's so funny every single time we do it with somebody, because I'm like, I have to explain it to them.
Like games. Like what?
Yeah, but with sidecars before, not just like in the middle of the podcast, right?
I like how you haven't even told your mom.